Leon Murphy.
Thank you.
I'd like to look at volume 1, please, of the evidence books, page 41.
Sure.
And, question, when exactly did you become credit risk officer? Chief risk officer.
Sorry. I became chief risk officer on the 1st of January 2009.
1st of January 2009?
Correct.
Not 2007?
No.
Okay. Here we have on page 41 in the volume.
Yes.
Board meeting of 1st of March 2007, and a concern from the regulator that Alan Merriman is responsible for both the commercial business and the risk function.
Yes.
And we spoke about this with Mr. Merriman at the time, and he said that the person in charge of risk at the time had access to the board and had access to management. That wasn't you then?
I think he was referring to me as head of risk.
As head of risk, okay.
But my reporting line was to him as chief risk officer.
Yeah.
And I think what the regulator was referring to here, and I think it's actually also in your core documents elsewhere, it's the letter from the regulator from 2007. What the regulator was calling out was that, in their opinion at that time, you shouldn't have someone who's responsible for risk who's also responsible for managing a business line within an organisation. And if we come to where we are today in terms of good corporate governance, it's now mandated that this is an independent function, independent of all business and operations.
I think Mr. Merriman was saying that his head of risk, had access to the board and had access to management if that person needed it. So is that an accurate reflection of the access you had in terms of decision making, or making, if you needed to make something aware? Could you bypass him, I suppose, is the question.
Oh, I would. No, I don't believe so. I didn't have reason to.
Okay.
Absolutely. But no, I would have, like everyone in middle management, I suppose, had occasion to make presentations to the board. But I was not a member of the executive, nor was I a member of the board at that time.
Okay. And so, do you think at the time that the regulator made this, or this was put forward by the regulator to the board, that the regulator was right to make this distinction, that there should be a separation of function?
I think that corporate governance standards were changing.
Okay.
I do think that they were right. I think, as Mr. Merriman said earlier today, he had a huge number of responsibilities. Thinking today, and we saw it emerging in 2007, but thinking today is, it is beneficial for a bank to have someone who's independent of the business to be able to challenge without any possible conflict decisions that might be made.
So how quick was the EBS to react to these concerns then? Was it 2 years until your appointment that this separation was made?
So, no, one step was done in the meantime. So the first step that was done was that the commercial property business that was reporting to Mr. Merriman was changed to report to a different executive director in 2007 or early 2008.
Okay.
But as I said in my own statement to you earlier, it was only in 2009 that we created a fully independent, dedicated Chief Risk Officer role in EBS.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on in the same booklet to page 109. This is the minutes of a Board Nominations Committee meeting on the 19th of February 2009. On page 109, and then just turning over to page 110, and we have about 2 people who were invited not to reapply for re-election to the board. And just to comment on that in relation to Mr. Merriman, who was one of them, the minutes talk about accountability and about the perception of accountability. So in relation to Mr. Merriman, which was this in your view?
It's a difficult question to ask me. As Mr. Merriman said, and I think as was well articulated in the 2008 accounts of EBS, the then chairman, who had been chairman for 2 years, set out that given that the society was reporting losses for the first time, the society felt it needed to demonstrate accountability to its members, and it wanted to do that both at board level and also at executive level. And as Mr. Merriman said earlier himself, he felt he was probably the right person from an executive level. Is any one person responsible for the decisions of the society? I don't believe so. The decisions and the risk decisions of the society, and indeed any bank, are a collective responsibility, in my opinion, of the board and also of the full executive team.
Was it a mistake to let Mr. Merriman go?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about that, not having been a member of either the executive or the board at the time. I know I heard Ms. Tinney earlier say that she felt that his skills would have been useful to the society, and certainly we heard from, I think, Mr. Merriman today to say that his preference would have been to stay. I think the overriding consideration was, as a mutual, EBS wanted to demonstrate accountability to members first and foremost, and it took the decision to put that consideration above other considerations.
Okay. And then just that same meeting, the CEO of Haven, yes, the subsidiary, was also invited not to stand for a second term because essentially the business had failed.
That's...
And I just ask you about that then. Why would the CEO of Haven take responsibility in that regard for a board decision to establish the subsidiary and it then to fail?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand your question. Forgive me.
Sorry. The question is, the CEO of Haven was, yes, invited not to stand because the business had failed essentially, and there was no role for the CEO on the board anymore. But the decision to set up Haven was a decision by the board.
Well, every decision was a decision of the board. So I think this decision in relation to whether or not to reappoint someone to the overall board was taken in the context that, having launched a broker business and having then had to shut it down, that there was no requirement to have an additional executive director on the board of EBS from that time.
Okay. And in relation to the joint venture that was meant to be happening with Britannia Building Society, when did that cease to be a possibility?
I'm not 100% sure of the time, but I think from memory it probably was the end of 2007 or in and around there.
So why did the EBS decide to continue with that venture? They decided to go into it on the idea that it would be split 50-50 with Britannia. Britannia pulls out because of the worries that they have about the Irish market. Yet the EBS continues with it.
So the EBS at that stage had built up a broker-sourced book, and also it had spent and invested a significant amount of money in building third-party servicing arrangements so that in order to service the book. And it did that based on, again, what I've read from the records and what I was involved in from a risk perspective in reviewing. It did that in order to create a business that potentially could be sold at a later date, and therefore having arm's length third-party servicing would be a benefit to the model. Having invested in all of that, it was decided to continue with a view in the future potentially to having other options and potentially selling it on, if appropriate, at some future date.
And then what happened to Haven then?
What happened to Haven was, as I think someone described it well at one time, was it was a good idea at the wrong time. So the society made decisions on the basis that it had very little credit to make available, that if it was making any credit available from 2008 and 2009, it was going to make it available to home owners and people who desired to own homes in Ireland and to its core membership.
Okay.
So it ceased to provide credit to Haven, but the capability was held. And actually AIB Bank now is using that capability in terms of its own broader business model. So Haven has effectively survived.
Right. And was there ever a cost put on the society for setting up Haven?
I know there was a mention of a cost earlier on, so there certainly was, but forgive me, I won't be able to quote the number to you now.
Okay, that's fine. We can find it ourselves.
Yes.
Thank you.
Apologies.
Thank you, Chair.